How's it going, everyone? This is Brian, and welcome back to the Tech Stack Playbook, your guide to apps, software, and tech, but in a fun way, I promise. So I had an amazing conversation with Ghadimi, and if you know him, he needs no introduction, but a lot of where I am trying to build the Tech Stack Playbook around is sort of the full stack of technology, entrepreneurship, startups, building business, and one of the key aspects that I'm very focused on is not just focusing on the technical, but also focusing on the mindset and the mission and vision and the business tangibles that build companies. And Ghadimi is amazing. He's a legend in terms of building up businesses, building up companies. He's a multimillionaire, has an amazing story, coming from nothing, building huge empires. And I personally have benefited a lot from following his mentorship and his guidance in building companies over the past couple years now. And when I graduated college, I actually found out about one of his companies, Secret Entourage, and that actually opened me up to a huge world of what you can do with business and what you can do with different skill sets. And it was very eye-opening to see people really building companies that make software and applications to companies that make like real products, things that you might see, in like Target or on QVC or really any major retailer. And I thought that was so fascinating because at least just coming out of college, you sort of think that there's kind of like only 5 things that you can do, or just in terms of like a limited amount of things you can do. And Secret Entourage was huge for me because it showed me that it was possible to be successful in different areas, not just in one thing. And that's just like what everyone does. You can be very different and have a lot of success. And I've seen this play out for a lot of my friends that have built businesses and companies. So it's very true to life. And I really love how PJ brings real things that he's done and real things that other people have done to the table, as opposed to kind of that, all high level talk and no action. I love how he unites people and communities together, and people that are doers and action takers. So this episode, I got to talk a little bit about this book, Gate of Choice, and one of my specific focuses of this year, among many, is getting more into reading. And this is something that kind of just like reading a book, you think about like reading a book or just sitting down and reading a book, it feels so inactive. It feels so like I'm taking a break from things and reading words on a page. And sometimes I feel like that's not enough doing, and I need to be doing, something else or something active. But actually sitting down and reading is something that actually is quite fueling for the mind, for the soul, just building your mind up with cool insights and ideas and thoughts. And this book actually was really, really, really pivotal because it walks you, of course it talks about like string theory and quantum mechanics and having multiple realities in the multiverse. And of course that is a super cool topic. So I'm excited for you all to hear PJ's thoughts on that. But even also in terms of consciousness and understanding the different realities that we create for ourselves. I think this episode is going to be really powerful for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners out there because it's, of course you see these articles of, the next big thing, but so much of that is mindset. And I think so much of that is willing something into existence and making it happen and uniting around other people to see and feel and emotionally feel invested in being a part of something that's, bigger than they are and bigger than this group and bigger than this community. And Gate of Choice was quite eye-opening, and it's definitely one of those books I'm going to be reading probably more than 3 or 4 times because it opened up a lot of doors in my mind, specifically around maybe just like realities that we might be closing from ourselves. And that's something that I think is going to be quite powerful for folks because when you think about, and PJ in the book talks, kind of uses Elon Musk as a foil to talk about creating a reality or creating different boxes for ourselves. And it was very interesting because I got to actually talk to him about this on the call, which you'll hear. But sort of, is Elon Musk, just as an example, is he an anomaly? Is he just kind of this all-powerful being that can basically do no wrong and just build things? And it was interesting because PJ had a different take, and he thought that Elon Musk created this reality that he wanted to achieve, and that was going to be achieved. And there was no compromise. There was no, middle ground or, cutting back. We were going to send people into space. We're going to send rockets into space. We're going to be able to land a rocket coming back to Earth. He kind of just set the tone for what was going to happen and then just went out and made it happen. And I think that that's very powerful because when you think about the different gates or the different opportunities or the windows that might be available to us, I think a lot of times we just close doors naturally because, oh, this might be a lot of work. Oh, what if they say no? Oh, what if there's a rejection? Oh, what if I spend a lot of time and this specific path doesn't work out? And I think that makes a lot of people just, quit or say no to something that could be a huge opportunity. So I wanted to just kind of use this specific episode of the Tech Stack Playbook to walk us through those different mindsets and different opportunities and ways to just think about the world. And it's not binary, right? There isn't sort of a left and a right path and that's the only thing, right? It's sort of these multi different types of realities, and we can opt into those different realities or opt out. It kind of depends on our willingness to achieve and our drive and our ambition. And I really admire PJ as someone who goes after opportunities and seizes the moment and makes it happen. And I'm just very grateful to have been following him for the past couple years. And I was very honored when I was able to just get him on a Zoom call to be able to interview him and talk to him. I mean, amazing opportunity, someone who I've looked up to for a really long time. And even just being able to talk about entrepreneurship and technology and building up a tech startup. I know that this episode is going to be bringing a lot of value to folks, and I'm excited to hear what you all think. But I think one of the things that is, at least sort of in my mind, was just taking a step back and kind of just allowing new perspectives to permeate, your mind, or just think about the world in different ways, because when you're really heads down, you might just be thinking that like this is the only path, but then you might be boxing yourself out of other opportunities and other paths that might be right in line for you to be a part of. So that's kind of where I think this specific book would be very important for people to be checking out. So I'm going to be dropping a link to the book below. Can't recommend it more highly enough. Super eye-opening, very, very, very powerful insights. And it's not that big. I was able to read it in a week. Definitely believe that you'd be able to as well. But I think it's going to be one of those books that you're going to want to read maybe 2 or 3 times, because there's just a lot of value in there, and it's kind of condensed into a very digestible read, but definitely needs to be processed multiple times. So again, I just huge thank you to PJ and the team for being able to make this happen. Really excited to have you all get into the content, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments and hearing what you have to think. All right, I'll drop this interview next, and looking forward to having you listen in. All right, thanks everyone. Hey everyone, this is Brian from Tech Stack Playbook, and I have an amazing guest, entrepreneur himself, Pejman Ghadimi, also known as PJ, on the Tech Stack Playbook. And just to give you a little bit of background about him, he is a best-selling author and the author of Third Circle Theory and The Gated Choice, which we're talking about today. He's also a self-made immigrant millionaire entrepreneur. He was featured in Netflix's Fastest Car Season 2, Episode 1. And he's also the founder and teacher at Exotic Car Hacks, Watch Trading Academy, and Secret Entourage, of which I've benefited greatly from as an entrepreneur. So PJ, just wanted to welcome you onto the show, the podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to do this with me.
You got it. My pleasure being here. So let's get into whatever you guys want to know.
Awesome. So the Tech Stack Playbook, very tech focused. A lot of like tech entrepreneurs, developers, people that are kind of builders themselves, but then also people that might want to make the next, Amazon or Google or Uber or any sort of big SaaS tech company. And I followed you literally since I graduated college. I remember hearing about Secret Entourage, and that was amazing because just hearing about the different levels of entrepreneurship and how people can do so many different things and be in tech, that kind of opened my eyes to what's possible, what's out there. And it kind of came at a great time because when I was graduating BU is very entrepreneurial, just in the sense of the graduates that come out of that. A lot of people build companies come out of BU. So I really kind of am just curious to kind of tee this off. I know you told me about how you love mentoring, business owners, leaders, helping people grow. Maybe just kind of tee this off of what you're most proud of, coming with your career that you're building and really your mission at the end of the day.
I think personally, what I'm most proud of actually is my own level of consciousness I've been able to reach. I think that a lot of people look for their achievements through their external lens, like what have I accomplished? How much money do I have? Things I've gotten. I've gotten through all these things as well. Not to say that, I haven't as part of the process, but I think being able to move past them, being able to attain it, and then not allow it to define you is one of the big differences between humans who are successful as being humans versus through their business success or their relevance to what they deem to be impact. I think too many times we get lost in the idea that we believe that our life is driven by the impact we make of others. So it's like, hey, how many people have I helped? Is that what I'm here to do? And so on and so forth. And I'm a believer of the exact opposite, actually, I think, which is not defined by how many people we help, but rather the levels of consciousness we can reach is part of the equation. And I think a lot of people aren't talking about that because it sounds cuter and sexier to talk about how many people you've helped or how much you've donated or what are you doing for others rather than really what are you doing for yourself. And I think that those who really understand that you can do a lot for yourself through others as well have a longer span of staying relevant in their own life rather than believing that their work is the only thing that makes their relevance.
That's powerful. I love that. And I think that kind of leads into, the gated choice. And we were just talking about this. I just finished reading it. Really, really, really powerful book. And I think very eye-opening to entrepreneurs. Me just being a tech entrepreneur, I was having a lot of kind of breakthroughs when I was reading it, and kind of just wanted to tee this off with what was your inspiration for writing The Gate of Choice? I know this is one of several books, including Third Circle Theory, sort of in your trilogy of writings and your philosophy and how you think about the world. But what was the key inspiration to writing this specific book, would you say?
So, well, Third Circle Theory needed a conclusion, right? So I think one of the things that people don't realize about these three books, first off, I wrote about 11 books. The books before these weren't very popular, meaning they didn't sell well. So people didn't necessarily take that message home. Some of the differences between these last three books and my final book, Gate of Choice, because I don't plan to write any other books past this, is that more than anything else, these three books were my own documentation of my own journey evolving through this process. So the first book, Third Circle Theory, is about the mastery of awareness. The second book, Radius, is about the transition from awareness to self-awareness and giving the human an identity, which is driven into two compartments, societal identity and cosmic identity. And it is that bridge that ultimately allows a person to go from their societal identity to their cosmic identity that leads us to the third book, which is The Gate of Choice, which is my own journey of becoming conscious and some of the things you realize once you become such. So the importance of the books is that they are driven upon my own experience of my own evolution as a human, rather than theoretical about, what I think someone should do to become conscious or what are some of the things that help those become conscious, but rather here's what has occurred to me as a human going through these stages. And here's how going through them, I was able to identify the steps that enabled me to grow. So it's like here, like if you understand this process and this process, then you'll most likely be able to practice something that'll trigger this particular karmic power within yourself, and it's also something that I paid very close attention to when writing, because I realized that a lot of what's in the book isn't necessarily revolutionary in the sense of what I'm talking about. Like when I talk about chakras or things like that, this has been talked about 7,000 times by 30,000, people, including, I mean, you can go to a gift shop and see a reiteration of what those things are. You hear even the words, I'm spiritual, from people so often, like that they go, oh, as a spiritual person, I understand how energy works and this and that. And I realized going through my own basically gate of becoming conscious was that a lot of these things we talk about, often the people talking about them don't really understand them. Mm-hmm. And what they don't understand is not like, oh, you're wrong, I'm right kind of scenario, but rather that they haven't experienced it. They've only experienced a segment of it. And so a lot of the existing work out there on this is just either incomplete or comes from a perspective that's not connecting how this particular item is relevant to all aspects of consciousness. So we have studies that are very profound and outstanding on astrology. We have studies that are very profound and outstanding on energy. We have, studies about how psychology evolves the human mind, etc. But have we looked at all of these things as one, and the connections they have to each other, rather than just saying, here's what you need to do about astrology? Like, we've connected the idea that, astrologic signs have something to do with personalities. But have we connected how that's connected to the idea of energy, chakras, and time? And those are things that, again, each of these particular subject experts who in their lives has devoted their lives to going after maybe certain trends or topics that are important in those fields aren't looking at them broadly through the lens of a human being. They're looking at it broadly through the lens of an astrologer or, an energy healer. And so they're not paying attention to the core of the human experience. And I feel that what this book does is it helps people understand how these tools, which they're tools ultimately, like language, are used to define the experience we create for ourselves. And I think that the more, like, when we look at language, look at how subjective language as a tool is. If I say something in a certain tone or a certain way, it changes your experience of it significantly, right?
Definitely.
I could say something very soft to you, and you might be like, "Oh, he's so nice to me, and he's trying to teach me something." And I could say the exact same thing in a very mean tone,
Mhm.
and you would look at it and be like, "Well, Peach is a jackass," like, he's so mean, like he doesn't care. And what I'm saying is, we've allowed language to define it because we've associated this idea of emotion to it. And this in itself is a perfect example of how the human experience is altered when you connect two things. Emotion and language
Mhm.
creates a very different depth to what is understood, right? And what the other
Mhm.
person takes home. So the same can be said about teaming up language with astrology and so on and so forth. And so the gated choice is basically my understanding of these tools that I've been able to use through my own transition to consciousness and how they all play into each other. And based on my perspective today, how I feel people can leverage such tools to still find massive success in their personal lives. And it instead of looking at, for example, saying, oh, being an entrepreneur was part of my life, is understanding where does entrepreneurship play a role in the human experience. That in itself is once again something very different.
That's awesome. I love that. And I feel like you will educate and share, but it's all based in experiences that you've lived. So I feel like, in a sense, like, the phrase, like, you walk the walk and talk the talk. I feel like you do really walk the walk as well. And I just wanted to kind of tee off one of the questions just with kind of the powerful section on entrepreneurship with unity around creation and how through entrepreneurship, we discover what we're capable of. And I kind of feel like, even building up, my own company now, I thought I really resonated a lot with this section of the book, and especially just on the belief of self-mastery and scaling to those higher version of ourselves. What would you say are the ways that we really do get to that self-mastery? Do we ever reach it, or is it sort of that we're always edging closer and closer and getting closer to that higher version of ourselves?
No, I think self mastery comes to living in a state of consciousness. Like, so you reach it the day you become conscious. I think that in itself, I mean, I labeled the book the definition for the higher human because the idea of becoming conscious in itself can be defined certain ways, right? Like, so many people believe they're conscious when they're really just victims of their ego.
Yep.
People also confuse and blend in lines, right? Like, between awareness, self-awareness, and consciousness. They think all three are the same thing. They use key terms like I'm woke or I'm awake. Not quite, but I mean, that's why, is generalized in that way, right? Someone who believes they're woke believes they're conscious, believes they're aware, believes they're self-aware. Someone scientific might say every human's conscious, like, so we're using a very generalized definitions to define certain steps that aren't so generic. And I think that's part of the broken concept of language, is that it's used here in a way that ultimately prevents us from seeking our own internal truth and makes us accept something. No different than when you talk about entrepreneurship. How many people use the word entrepreneur when they start a business? You're like, what do you do? I start a restaurant. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. And I can label you 500 different ways why that would be completely inaccurate. But again, that in their mind, there's only one definition. To somebody, an entrepreneur is a self-employed person. To someone else, an entrepreneur is someone who's innovative. And to someone else, an entrepreneur is an Elon Musk and nothing less, So again, definitions matter. And I think one of the key concepts of understanding how entrepreneurship and consciousness work together is understanding that entrepreneurship, like I described in the book, is basically unity around creation. And, in people, how prisons and mental blocks and living in boxes is ultimately how we're conditioned to exist. And while someone may say, well, I don't want to live in a prison or in a box, there are also necessary steps to take for structural growth. So you have to go from one to the next. And in order to do that, you have to accept you're in a prison, to enhance your prison, then grow your prison, and eventually evolve. At any time you're in a box or in a prison, you're always at the mercy of the company, which is the box you live in. That particular box, that moment, that doesn't even mean it's the entire box you live in, right? Because you don't live at work. But that box you enter when you go to work is basically under someone else's commands. The rules of that box exist because of someone else's creation, right? So someone created a bank, you walk in it and you work there, right? Like you're an employee at that bank and you just walk in and you're now under the structure and rules of that bank, right? And now you might have your own box within that box because you might be in a leadership position. You might lead 10 people who enter your box. But ultimately, the master or the god of your space is not yourself, right? Now, eventually, when your box becomes big enough, right, and if you become the CEO of that company, your box mirrors the box you work in because you are choosing the structure in which this mastery changes, right, for everybody else. So whoever controls the box controls the experience of all those in the box, right? But what happens is as you grow and you kind of evolve past the boxes, you use a structure for growth, you get to a stage where you're going to have to choose what kind of box do you want to create for yourself and not be given, but rather create. And that is the beginning of when the entrepreneurial journey starts, right? Someone exits that, right? And goes, it's time for me to build my own box. And as they build it, other people will basically follow suit and enter that box. Your employees, partners, people you've involved in the concept and the cause, et cetera. They'll enter your box, your creation, right? But that box keeps evolving as you go because you're becoming more and more creative. And so that's why I'm a big believer that creativity is the ultimate tool and the ultimate weapon man has to bridge himself from basically his state of self-awareness to a state of consciousness. Because you see, when the mind evolves, it goes through these 3 steps, which is to understand that it's aware, it's able to understand what's happening around it, to its self-awareness, which is defining its identity in societal space. So I'll use myself as an example. As a human being, I understood that I lived in America, for example. That's where my environment was basically established. And then I understood that my societal identity was going to be in finance and to be a banker. I'd chosen that profession. I chose that purpose and I followed it through until I kind of realized that I had achieved a high enough level of success, even both working for others as well as working for myself, and still didn't identify with the ideas of being a banker for life. And so I understood there had to be more to my life. I was seeking an alternative path. And so then I made a conscious choice to go into teaching as my cosmic purpose, meaning like I said, hey, my identity is to be in finance, but then my cosmic identity, meaning mine as a human, not one that is accepted or unaccepted by society, but rather one that I choose to pursue, is to teach. Now, naturally, the thought of what I teach evolved with the first things that I was very good at in society, which are finance, right? I teach finance through Exotic Car Hacks and Watch Trading Academy and through even Secret Entourage. It's the economics of life, right? Yep. So that's because of my experience. I said, well, what would I teach? I would teach the things I'm really good at, right? So that's what I'm going to go through. And so that happens. And then once you accept your cosmic identity, then comes the part where your creativity bridges the gap from where you are to how do you get people to kind of accept your cosmic identity? Meaning, how do you get recognition for your acceptance, right? And that comes from just this very simple act, which is unity around creation, to be entrepreneurial nature and to create other elements that other people can use these boxes for. So I basically created boxes for people, right? Secret Entourage, Exotic Car Hacks, Watch Trading Academy. And people enter my experience that I want them to have by entering these boxes and taking out of it anything they wish to take, right? Basically, that was set up for them to take. And through that journey, the one difference, because I get this question a lot, is how do you know you're conscious? Like, how do you know you've gained that level? Uh, a state of consciousness is a state of connectivity, it's a state of living in a place no longer with questions, no longer with fears, no longer with uh, loss of direction or misunderstanding of purpose, but rather waking up with a very deep understanding of the connections that occur between the people, between events, between acts, between places, and really no longer having questions about those things, meaning just understanding that there are certain things that the mechanics of the world basically are open themselves to you. And you start understanding very clearly how and what fits where. And I think that these mechanics are so dynamic all the time that your state of consciousness allows you to actually keep up with the very fast pace. So ultimately, time dilutes itself and past, present, and future become one because you're no longer a person that is waiting for a future to be created. You're no longer a person living in the past. You're a person understanding that your existence here on earth is only validated by the experience you create for yourself in or out of boxes that others have created. And so, for that reason, you become a lot more capable of what I call handling the human you are through this time passage that you have here on earth.
Super cool. And even like in the book, I was kind of building off of that. I loved the connection to string theory and vibrations and multiple realities with the multiverse. I just know, being a tech channel, I feel like people
Mhm.
might be interested in hearing, your thoughts on that, because this is stuff that like I, go down the rabbit hole on YouTube videos and listen to
Mhm.
other people talk about it. But what do you think about all of this stuff? Like, could you kind
Well,
of
I
dive
mean,
into that a little bit?
yeah, string theory is just like I said, string theory by itself may sound scientific, in nature to those like science fiction, to those who
For
don't
sure.
understand it, or maybe Google the video on YouTube and they were like, what is that? But the reality is that it's not really science fiction if you understand and apply what you're understanding to the human experience itself. Like I break down in the book the core concepts of the existence of men in a third dimensional space, imprisoned by a fourth one,
Mhm.
and how we can break down an insect lives in one dimension, which is one point in space at a time. An animal like a lion or a cat only exists in a two-dimensional playing field, imprisoned by a third, again in space. And one of the things that's very interesting for people is they'll argue me all the time is say, aha, you're wrong. Animals can think in 3D, right? They can go
Mhm.
anywhere. They can go up and down tables. They can go forward and backward. Again, the limited understanding that 3D in their space just basically means a video game, which has no correlation to what we're talking about here. When we think about an animal functioning in a three-dimensional space, it's not really true because an animal cannot plan its participation in that space. An animal can only act from a point A to point B, meaning even a lion, while it may look like it's making multiple motions, at a stage of it exists in one point in space, it exists in a second point, which is the B space, when it makes an action. But in its own mind and its own capacity for understanding, then it simply turns point B into point A again. So the function of an animal is always A to B, A to B, A to B, and B becomes A again. So in a continuous basis, you can't ask an animal, it's been proven time and time again, that animals don't have, even the smartest of monkeys, don't have a notion of time. And so they can't be told where to go by a certain time. They can't say, hey, meet me at the Empire State Building at 3 p.m. tomorrow morning. The animal will forget its notion of what it needs to do the next day. Like it won't be able to. But you can tell an animal, go to the corner of the room, go to this place. When it gets to that place, it will ultimately then seek once again, what is the next command that I need to take on, not just by a human, but by themselves. The difference between a human and an animal is that while we also exist in a three-dimensional space, we enter the dimension of time as the first line of prisoners towards it. So we live in a space-time environment, meaning we live in a third dimension where we can function in a full space because we have an understanding of our position in time and therefore can relate it to the space we occupy. And an animal does not have any notion of time, so it simply operates in a space. So any type of insect is basically a one-dimensional being caught into a two-dimensional space. An animal is a two-dimensional being stuck in a three-dimensional space, and a human is a three-dimensional being stuck in a fourth-dimensional time. So we can never control time. That's why we fear it. Everything we've ever done in our life has been to try to speed up time, right? Mm-hmm. Any tech startup, anything is always driven on time. What does Uber do? It saves you time, like, because you used to have to look for a cab, and then wait for a cab and call a cab and wait 40 minutes or an hour. And now within 5 minutes, you can be in a cab technically, right? Like,
exactly.
So they solved the idea of waiting for a cab. That was their main idea, really. It was like, how do I cut that time down? Because people always want to go faster, right? And even today, when you call an Uber and you see that the next Uber is 20 minutes away, you get frustrated and you're like, what the hell is this? Like, yeah. Supposed to be here in 3 minutes. What are you talking? 20 minutes. I'm going to cancel this and get another guy, because you've now gotten used to the idea that time in itself has to flow to a certain degree, right? For it to make sense for you, Exactly. So you go like, hey, for me to use this service, I expect something in 5 minutes or less, or anything more just will not really work for me, right? And so the point I'm trying to make here is really that I think if you look at every invention and every stride man has ever made in their existence, it's always been to cut down time. Mm-hmm. And every car you can think of in the world has always been built as a faster version of its predecessor. Now we're going to a level of hybrid cars now where gasoline no longer takes. But look at the one company that won the electric game, which was Tesla, right? When it comes to electric vehicles. Why did they win it? Because unlike every other manufacturer who focused heavily on how do we give people better gas solutions, going hybrid will help them save money, nobody gave a shit. Nobody did anything about it. But the moment Tesla said, listen, we made a sedan, it goes 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. Basically, it's just the fastest thing on the road and it's fully electric. Everyone adopted the technology. And again, so indirectly, man has a very interesting relationship to time. It's their fear of being trapped by it forever, because it's the one box they don't know how to evolve past. And what's really interesting is that this is the art of consciousness. The art of consciousness is to evolve past the final frontier that keeps you into what I call just the human space experience, and start learning that your experience here means more than just how you use the space within an allocated time, but rather how you experience the space based on your own time. And I think those are things that may sound complex to some, but are the foundation for what makes those most successful able to do so much more in such less time. Like, someone may look at an Elon Musk and say, how do you run so many companies, start new ones, do this? How does PJ own so many communities, so many separate businesses, this and that, and still has plenty of time to go home and hang out with his family or friends or anything? And the answer is simple, is that, again, the mastery of time comes from the art of consciousness. So the more conscious you become, the less you become a prisoner of that time that you're so afraid of.
That's awesome. And yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people will resonate with this conversation, because we all are trying to, get hours back in the day, be more efficient. And, in a sense, it's really the consciousness of what we have and the resources we have to really leverage that. So I loved your insights on that. And kind of building off of that, another passage of the book that I was really drawn to was on this line, and you talked about how a human is incapable of driving anywhere a road it doesn't exist, on the sole fear that you'd get lost. And I think a lot of times, as I've been mentored right now in building a startup, there's sort of that, like, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I feel like that's a phrase that kind of gets thrown around a lot, but you don't necessarily have to know the destination to know that you're going on the right path. I feel, I mean, that you're leveling up and you're building and scaling, but what do you kind of have for those types of builders, innovators, developers, people that are kind of in that 3-dimensional space that want to shift to the 4th dimensional?
So the issue, remember what we just talked about? We talked about the bridge to that gap is creativity, right?
Yeah.
What is a road that doesn't exist? The opportunity for someone to create one, right? It's no different than that. I think when we talk about people don't travel places where roads don't exist, they're typically people who live in boxes. Those people in early stages of awareness typically go wherever the road takes them, meaning if the road allows them to, they don't realize that the road in itself is a prison, right? Because it's a path created by someone else. Now, this does not mean that you should never follow a road. It might be more efficient on your path to your consciousness to follow a road that already exists, but at some point or another, you're going to have to realize that consciousness is not a team sport. Consciousness is an individual journey, meaning it is not a team journey. It's not about your family. It's not about your kids. It's not about your growth, like what are you doing for them and how good of a parent you are. It has nothing to do with any of that shit. So what happens is the person has to realize at some point or another and take accountability that it is a personal journey to take. And it means that even though you follow a road to a certain extent, at some point or another, that road is going to come to an end and a choice is going to have to be made to either progress or to basically play within the sandbox you've been given. And progression can only come with the idea that creativity is going to lead that forward. And then the other part too is that the part about business and entrepreneurship that people don't realize, because again, it's generalized into Instagram quotes for people to basically get lost in. I'm sure you've heard when people talk about you should always enjoy the journey, right?
Yep.
They're like, it's not about the end result, it's about the journey, right?
Yeah.
Well, these are the things that are just like stupid shit that people put on Instagram that pollutes the space of individuality, because it forces people to think that is to be independent, is to think that way, when in reality it's just yet another pretty road, that's made you to believe your ego more than your reality, right?
Yep.
And it's very important to understand that the journey is only experienced well if it has a conclusion. And the conclusion doesn't have to be death. And I think that's the part that people don't, they don't put two and two together. Instead, that conclusion could be your capacity to have used your creativity to bridge your consciousness. And what that means is there are different levels to that consciousness as well. Remember, just like there's different animals that exist in different space, right? There's also different levels to time past. Exactly. We talked about the multiverse earlier. That is in the fifth idea or the next stage of human evolution. And someone would argue, well, what do we need to know about the multiverse? Well, nothing, because we're still in the fourth stage. It doesn't matter what the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th stages are. It's like worrying about a video game when you're like, I wonder what's in stage 10 when I haven't even past stage 1. It's like, you'll never find out. You'll never get there. So it doesn't matter. And I think that some of the things that, again, people need to realize is that, you have to let go of this idea that you can win on the way to the final stage of your life. You don't have to win. You don't have to enjoy it. You don't have to enjoy the experience of growing, because the enjoyment, which is the emotional aspect of it, comes after the result, not during the process. And I think because we've been brainwashed into thinking that we have to have fun while we're growing, we have to enjoy, we have to balance our life, we have to do this. Those are all systems meant to keep you prisoners, because the more you balance your life, the less likely you are to break free. It's almost like saying, I want to escape prison, but I really want it to be a pleasant experience. I was hoping the guards would go to sleep at 5 and they would leave a door open and it'd be very soft. I wasn't expecting to get hurt, get caught in a fire or have to swim to land. No, I was just hoping everything be perfect and lined up and I would just walk through that door. And that's the majority of how humans see the experience of being a human. They love it because we've been conditioned to enjoy and expect comfort. And you see, comfort is the greatest enemy to evolution. Because comfort is the disease that reminds you that why should you try to be so much better at something when you have, like, humbleness is a disease. That's another, I know it sounds like so mean, right? Like to be like, if you're humble, you're an idiot. But you are, because once you become grateful and just satisfied and content with what you have, you seek less, right? You go, why should I risk what I have? I'm so humbled by my success that Why should I go for the bigger idea? Why should I go for the bigger opportunity? And then you start seeking balance again. Balance is a trait of comfort. So you keep falling in a cycle where you shouldn't push, but then you forget that the reason you even got where you got was because you pushed so far.
Yeah. I feel like that will resonate with a lot of folks. And even in the book, you were talking about aspiration as just our secret weapon that we can leverage. And I really wanted to unpack that. Just why do you think aspiration is such a superpower, really for entrepreneurs and builders? I feel like even in tech, you have this idea of the future and where you want to scale it to. But is aspiration sort of that, like the carrot that you're following? Like it's sort of that North Star?
Way, that's a very good way to put it. It is, but I think it's also the ability to evolve yourself through the process. I mean, look,
Mm-hmm.
if you're going through building a business and you make some money, right? Is your life going to improve throughout the way? Sure. Is it going to improve to its final stage? Probably not, but it's going to improve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to always relate everything in the spiritual to the physical. When you live here on earth, you have senses. You have your eyes, your ears, your nose, right? And you have your mouth. Imagine what happens steak. That might be incredible, right? You might eat that and be like, I've never eaten anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a very hard time regressing back to going to Outback and having a $20 steak and being like, this was excellent. I'm so humbled by the opportunity to have this steak, right?
Yep.
If you're humbled by the steak at Outback, you're not going to seek a $3,000 steak, And again, this isn't for those of us that are, looking at this and saying, eating meat will kill the planet. I get it. Like, that's not what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the idea that the more you experience certain things, the more your eyes and your mind become accustomed to making it the norm. And the more extraordinary your senses, the higher you seek possibilities of what can be. Why is it that most people who have had massive success, if you ask them, hey, were you mentored by someone or not? They may say yes or no, but they may say, well, I've observed some pretty great people in my life. I've worked for this guy that was a multi-billionaire, and because they just witnessed with their eyes what aspiration looks like, what's possible, right? So they saw it from someone else and they go, if they did it, how come I can't, right? That's why there's such an opportunity today for most humans who are stuck in the stage of just having social media even. That's a view into things that are possible. The reason it creates character flaws because most of the things you see are bullshit, meaning they're fake facades of what happened, right? So if someone's faking what they created or how big they've gotten, then someone goes, yeah, like I can't do that. Like I can't connect the dots here. This isn't matching to me, right? So they can see a 16-year-old in a yacht and the kid's like, yeah, I'm self-made. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like I can't connect that, so I can't pursue that, right? But if they hear a story and they're like, yeah, that guy worked 20 years, they're like, well, I can do that too. I can do even probably faster than 20 years. So what happens is our senses we're pre-programmed the way to basically seek more. And when we fall victim to listening to societal bullshit that's like, you should be humbled, you should be happy, you should be content with the things you have, and just go home and count your blessings, you're basically off into a comfort zone that doesn't exist anywhere, that someone persuaded you is the way to live.
Yeah, totally. And kind of just building off of that, just maybe on like one final question, because this is like an amazing conversation, and I feel like this is just going to bring a lot of value to people. You of course had a great little synopsis with Elon Musk kind of as an example as an entrepreneur, as a builder, but I'm just kind of curious, do you see him as an anomaly, or is he just an example of someone that's manifesting, those higher ideals in the gate of choice? How much of it is a conscious decision, and really just how much choice do we have? I imagine like a lot of people on this channel, they too want to build, something as successful as, what Elon or, you have created, but,
I
they
think that's the mistake, right? I think, and again, that's why I said consciousness is not a team sport. What Elon has created, what I've done, what anyone else has done. You pick any other successful person, doesn't matter, they're billionaires, multi-billionaires, life changers, game changers, control the world or not. They've created their own reality, and that's what they've done. And they live in it. They've created their own box, right? And someone like Elon has a much bigger box than I have, because it's got a lot more influence, right? Meaning he controls a larger portion of what other and other people's experiences are like, right? Like, and that's the thing to understand about boxes. People look at them as prisons and negatives, like, why would you entrap people? But you're not. You're just managing and owning the correlation of people's experiences in that box. I mean, my belief is, we've always been told growing up in every religion that we should always worship God, right? We should always look at a God or whatever presence or the universe and worship it. And my view after I became conscious was that we were always built to become our own gods. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the way, society trapped us into thinking that we had to worship someone else and their direction. And I think that someone like an Elon already accepted that that was his trajectory and that he controlled that experience for others. And so his goal, just like mine and many other people's, has always been to become gods of their own space. Because we can't be gods of time, because we are the insect in the time spectrum. But in the space spectrum, we are the gods. Get it? So we are the gods of space. So what happens is, and isn't that funny how like he's going to space, right? Like I find that like literally, right? Which I find that very like amusing. But at the same time, that's what I say when I say everything is interconnected, and we can look at it that way and say that someone could really care about their own experience, that they've created things to basically control the entire experience narrative of what they want to see and what others are experiencing as well. And I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think Elon is an anomaly. I think he's amongst those people that are ready to go, basically, that have outlived their time in the space continuum. And I think that my belief, based on all my writings and my experience, is that once you graduate that space-time, you go into the next level. And the next level isn't always defined by you're just coming back to live another life, and hopefully it's going to be better this time, or you're going to start richer or something, but rather really understanding that you've mastered the personalities necessary to give yourself an identity outside of the one you've been given on Earth. And I think that this starts with one of the ways you can truly see these traits in people is look for the people that genuinely don't give a shit about anything. And they have a direction and they don't care about anything else. Meaning like they like, you could go to someone and be like, hey, your ideas suck, dude. Like, these are horrible. And that person would have zero shift in their behavior, their character. And they're kind of driven by this like force they can't explain, but it's just like, I just know this has to happen. It has to happen this way. And I just have to bridge that, because they're in that zone between the two dimensions where they're basically creating. And they're trying to bridge that gap, and nothing is going to, well, it's possible you derail them, but I'm saying if they succeed, nothing should be able to derail them. How many times did we hear people comment negatively about Tesla, their cars, SpaceX, this is stupid, this won't last, BMW put them out of business, and all of a sudden, like, he wasn't commenting, he wasn't fighting, he was just doing his thing, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, it's the most powerful car company in the world. Okay, anyways, game over. Have a good day. Everybody, like, it's not like, hey, I think they're gaining some pace. You're just like, okay, it's just done. The rest doesn't matter anymore. Like, it's done. Like, the concept is over. Like, the fight wasn't really a fight for him. It was a fight for others. It wasn't their place to create that.
100%. Yeah, he created that reality. And I think that's actually probably really powerful for a lot of entrepreneurs out there, people that are building and maybe people that are doubting, or hating, and then they need to create that reality for themselves and then bring people into that and create those boxes.
Right. But most people, you see, that's the problem with most people, is that they don't want to create a reality for themselves. You see, this is the idea of why I believe that we were always positioned to become gods and not be worshippers of, seek control over creation. So one of the things that's really interesting is a lot of human beings, when they can't create anymore, like they don't know how to create, or they don't know how to bridge that gap, create a falsified narrative of being gods to others, which is a control mechanism of manipulation, right? They go like, hey, look at how successful I am, when they're lying, right? They're creating this fake narrative. Why? Because their ego says you can't become what you seek. So at least control what you can't become. Get it? And then you ultimately have this fake narrative that makes them feel better about themselves, And it's not true, meaning like that's not what's supposed to occur. But then they're doing it for the sake of other people's opinions and validation. Therefore, creating a falsified sense of godhood. And look at, there's only two types of people. Either the people that create that false sense and justify why they shouldn't progress anymore. We call those the herd. And then we call the higher man the one who says, I have a direct path to this and a direct line to this, and I'm going to work on that and get there. And there's nothing else that matters.
Exactly. Well, PJ, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this episode of the Tech Stack Playbook. All your insights are always really valuable and helpful, and I know a lot of people that watch this channel will appreciate them too. Just to kind of close out, how can people find you? Do you have social handles? Do you have websites? How could people best get connected with you and find out more?
The simplest way to connect to me is to go on my social media. I Create Millionaires on Instagram. They can find me, and a lot of my stuff is on there. And another very easy way is just go to my personal website, pejmanghadimi.com, or learnfrompj.com. Really simple places. And then from there, I'm sure people can figure out how to click links and get themselves there. And if not, then you're probably the wrong person to follow me.
I was going to say people probably will be able to find you.
Yeah, at that point, you should just go read the Disney Channel or something.
That's awesome. Well, PJ, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this. And I'm excited to just share content as well about this, because I think, we covered multiverse, we covered consciousness, ascending to that higher self, that higher purpose. So a lot of real tangible value adds for entrepreneurs, innovators, builders out there. So super grateful for just following you the past couple of years and being on the channel.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Hopefully this message resonates with people enough to get them to take action for themselves. So have a wonderful afternoon, my friend. Till next time.
Awesome. Till next time. Thank you. All right. So that was an amazing conversation, super eye-opening insights, and really just insightful conversation. And again, huge thank you to PJ and the team for making this happen. I hope that you all got a lot of value out of this. And I just think that this conversation is going to be one that, even just playing to the Tech Stack Playbook, this episode, I think, is really helping to build, you as the person, we as people. We can build skills, we can build abilities, we can work on those skills and those abilities, we can train them. But are we also building ourselves, and are we building our, maybe mental fortitude, or our mental toughness, or our resiliency, or just our tenacity to make things happen? And just having that mental fortitude to get things done and achieve and go beyond things that we might not have thought of before. I'm even thinking just very recently to having my company selected to present to a panel of NASA chief technologists, engineers, and scientists. And that in and of itself is kind of, a miracle that we were able to get in front of, such visionaries, and just the honor to being able to represent and be a part of such a small select grouping of companies to be presenting it in front of people that are at NASA. I mean, these are the brightest minds in the world, right? In our nation. And it was just so humbling to be a part of something like that. And it was very interesting because after reading Gate of Choice, being able to then have that opportunity for my company, I really almost found myself kind of in that same boat of reaching that higher self. And that's what in the Gate of Choice, PJ talks a lot of what is the higher self when you're ascending? It's beyond that, self-actualization in the pyramid, right? It's higher than this. What is that higher self that you want to create for yourself, for your life, for your community, for your group? I just found myself constantly thinking about, wow, even just thinking about when I was little, going down to NASA and going back down to Cape Canaveral and, being amazed at space. And then maybe kind of 15 years later being, kind of there, kind of virtually, of course, because it's COVID, but, so many years later, over a decade later, being able to now present to people that I've always looked up to, and I always look up at on the Twitter posts on NASA, and now being able to present my company and technology that I've helped to build in front of that. I mean, that's just incredible. And I still do find myself referring back to this book, because thinking of that higher self of where do I want to see myself? Where do I see my career going? Where do I want to see my company going? Where do I want to see my communities and my groups going? This is something that again, we constantly want to find ourselves thinking of which path are we going down and which reality are we creating for ourselves and what's the reality that we're trying to will into existence. And this is just something that, again, just going back to the gate of choice, that's still what I'm thinking of. Even right now, just thinking about how can I enable this, again, higher version of myself and higher reality. So as we think about, creating that life for ourselves, what are the steps that we need to take, and how do we ascend, and how do we really develop, of course, maybe a business, but again, also like in here, right? And in here, what are the tangibles that we can bring to the table? So I hope you got a lot of value from this conversation. I definitely did. And this book specifically is a part of a trilogy. There's Radius and there's Third Circle Theory. Those were the two other books prior to Gate of Choice. So, if you're interested, definitely look at those as well as the Gate of Choice, because they build on each other and it's all sort of transactional. It builds, right? And it compounds. So I'm going to drop links to those books in the description below. Or if you're listening to this on the podcast, it's going to be in the description, in the show notes. But definitely excited to hear what you all thought. I mean, anyone that's really into quantum mechanics and string theory, super interested in hearing your thoughts on that. And even if you haven't heard of it, and it's very interesting, if you want to give it like a quick Google search later, very, very, very cool area of theory of how the world works, how things work the way that they do. Those coincidences, are they coincidences or are they not? So super, super cool. So there's that. I'm really happy to be having an episode like this on the Tech Stack Playbook because, of course, we need to be developing our skills as professionals, but we also need to be developing ourselves as people, right? And as leaders and as visionaries and as builders. So this is an episode that will be very, very, very hopeful and insightful for a lot of folks, I believe. And yeah, I'm just excited to have you all listen in to this episode. And we've gotten, I think, over 50 downloads on the podcast so far, which is super cool. And we're up to 70 views on the YouTube channel. So definitely, if this is interesting to you and you're interested in this type of content, would love, love, love to have you share this with someone else you think might find it valuable. Maybe share it on social media or DM it to someone. Really interested in expanding this channel, and I have a lot of very cool interviews stacked up that I'm going to be dissecting as I go along. So really excited to be dropping those in the coming month ahead, and looking forward to continuing to build the channel up. So again, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this episode, and I'll see you all next time. All right, thanks everyone. See you. Bye.